Two. Hello, everyone. This is Dean Cogram from Thunderbird Global Headquarters in downtown Phoenix. It's great to be with all of you again. We have a small set of participants. Let's wait a couple of minutes and we'll start the webinar. We're hot off the heels of our first Thunderbird Global Alumni Network Advisory Group meeting and Professional Networking Day. We had a great day where Professor Lindy Elkins-Tanton of the Interplanetary Initiative at ASU gave a talk. We had a fantastic session with Professor Bill Youngdahl of Thunderbird on the fourth IR, Industry 4.0, engaging our alums. Today we have Adam Roy Gordon from the UN Global Compact USA Network. I'll introduce Adam in a second. Regularly, we're going to be doing these webinars every last Wednesday of the month. And please send us your suggestions, and particularly the alumni engagement group of the TGAN, the Thunderbird Global Alumni Network, that's really in charge of making sure that we are meeting your needs and aspirations, interests in terms of these webinars. We're excited to continue them and to make sure that there are times so that as many T-Birds around the world can engage, and we get lots of different perspectives, both from here at Thunderbird and ASU, as well as from alums and partners around the world. So I'm just going to pause for just a minute to see if other folks join, and then we'll introduce Adam. And then Adam's going to speak for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up. While we're waiting, I'll just remind everyone that we're excited about being the academic partner of the USA network of the UN Global Compact. Kelly Kreiser and her team at Thunderbird for Good with Anna Shen, our wonderful alum, really took the lead in helping us win this wonderful opportunity. We're excited to really take that and build it into a really long-term partnership with Adam and everyone over at the Compact, both in the US and around the world, given our T-Bird alums all around the world. And we'd like to get you all involved in networks, national networks, and in your countries as well. So, like I said, let me just give another minute or so to see if we get some other participants to join. Okay, so this is Dean Cogram again. Welcome to those who've joined since I just did a brief introduction. Today we have our next webinar for alumni and partners around the world. As you know, our goal is to do every other sort of Thunderbird ASU faculty and then alumni or other partners, friends from our collaborating organizations. I mentioned just now that we're delighted and honored to be the academic partner for the USA network of the UN Global Compact, which has now been in business for nearly 20 years, almost 20 years now, 1999, I believe, right, when we started. And so Adam Roy Gordon's going to be our speaker today, and let me introduce him to you. Adam Roy Gordon is Engagement Director for the Global Compact Network USA, the USA network of the UN Global Compact. The UN Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative with over 10,000 members across 163 countries. And Adam leads engagement with US-based participants, companies, nonprofits, labor, and others. Previously, Adam worked at CDP in their supply chain program, supporting the integration of climate change, water, and deforestation disclosure into corporate purchasing. He was an EDF Climate Corps fellow at Colgate-Palmolive Company in the global supply chain. And beyond that, he has diverse experiences in sustainability that ranges from advising the government of Montenegro on green building policy to founding New York City's first commercial composting waste hauler, New York Compost. He holds a BA from Oberlin College and an MS in Sustainability Management from Columbia University. I want to welcome Adam. He's going to speak for about 20 or 30 minutes, as I mentioned. But really, the focus then of questions and answers can be about the Compact in general, about what the Compact is doing with Adam's leadership and our support in the US, and then more broadly and deeply, what we're looking to do at Thunderbird in support of the Compact here in the US and around the world. So Adam, it's great to have you. Thanks to Kelly and the team for organizing, Dawn for her great work, Robin and everybody here. And we'll hand it over to you. Welcome.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone at Thunderbird for hosting me. And we're very excited for this new partnership and to share the Global Compact and this partnership with the Thunderbird alumni community is a big part of why we're here. So I'll provide an introduction to the UN Global Compact. Let me see if I can move the slides. As Dean Sanjeev mentioned, the UN Global Compact was founded in 1999 by then Secretary General Kofi Annan, actually at the World Economic Forum in Davos. It was founded through a speech he gave, fundamentally asking the world to put a human face on the global market. As globalization was taking new forms, the role and responsibility of the private sector was raising new questions, existential questions. And so he provided this speech, and many companies came up afterwards saying, okay, great, how do we make a commitment to that global compact you mentioned? From that, the UN Global Compact was formally created in 2000 with our founding executive director, Georg Kell, on the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact, which represent the norms and values of the UN. So the fundamental idea of the UN Global Compact is to have the private sector, to have businesses at the highest level, at the CEO level, make a commitment to the norms and values of the United Nations as embodied in a commitment to the 10 principles which represent the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, the Universal Declaration for Rights at Work, the Rio Declaration for the Environment, and the Universal Declaration Against Corruption. From that, the UN Global Compact grew into the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative, now with about 10,000 companies and several thousand additional non-business members that have made that commitment to the Global Compact. Those commitments spread the globe in over 160 countries, and much of the Fortune 500 has made that commitment. Now, being as broad an initiative as the UN Global Compact is, spreading much of the world, the local network system was created to create a local community for engagement, to set priorities at the local level. So there are over 70 local networks for the UN Global Compact around the world, from countries across Latin America, Asia, Europe, Africa, Oceania, and of course, North America. The US network is one of the more recent local networks. We were founded and incorporated in 2014 as an independent 501c3. And I lead the work of the US network. We are relatively early in our maturity, and so we have chosen to partner with Thunderbird to establish a greater presence in the US and really jumpstart a lot of our work here in a very exciting way. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the SDG wheel on the slide as well. In 2015, as part of Agenda 2030, the UN set forth its goals for the world for the next 15 years, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we hope to achieve as a planet by 2030. And the UN Global Compact, being a special initiative of the Secretary General's office, was tasked with defining what business leadership on the SDGs looks like. And so now, since 2015, a commitment to the Global Compact encompasses not only the 10 principles of the Global Compact, but additionally the ambition of the Sustainable Development Goals. All this is to say, in the past 20 years since the founding of the Global Compact, where the commitment to the Global Compact might be pushing the needle in some ways, at this point in time, business has surely changed. I think there's very little debate that corporate sustainability, that environmental, social, and governance issues are at the core of good business. Sustainability fundamentally is no longer an option, it's a competitive necessity. And to really reinforce that is the fact that investors surely are listening at this point, separate from the fact that that following ESG principles has greater returns for companies, and there are many data points that reinforce this. Excitingly and recently, many leading financial institutions are letting it be known that this is quite important to them. BlackRock recently announced in the past month a new set of ESG, environmental, social, and governance ETFs based around the UN Global Compact and using the UN Global Compact and the 10 principles as a screen for good business. Additional organizations, JP Morgan, BNY Mellon, more recently, I think last week, S&P announced a new set of indices around the UN Global Compact. Investors are very much paying attention, and companies really don't have an excuse anymore. That's a nice way to put it. But of course, sustainability is a big challenge to address. There are many issues, from gender equality, from water stewardship, climate, diversity, the different ratings and rankings and disclosures required in sustainability. It is a fairly large undertaking, not to mention the budget and resource constraints that might come with it. And so what we at the Global Compact propose is that the SDGs be a roadmap for engagement for businesses. When we partnered with PwC in 2015 to get an understanding of the business understanding of the SDGs, much of the business world was aware of the SDGs, but very few were actually at the point where they were setting goals, and even fewer identifying the tools needed to work towards the SDGs. Things have changed in the past few years, but the SDGs now are very clearly a roadmap for business, and they are a tool for the world to use. Oop. Just want to highlight one of our engaged US members, Colgate-Palmolive, which Sanjeev mentioned I did work for previously, so maybe I'm a little biased, but Anne Tracy, their Vice President of Global Sustainability, EHS, and Supply Chain Strategy at Colgate, recently said that being part of the UN Global Compact is very important to Colgate, because it provides credibility both internally to employees, which I think is very important when you're addressing sustainability issues, but also externally, and it's importantly an opportunity to connect with peers. So beyond the tools and resources, which I'll get into, having that community of best practice really is how you move the needle. So I mentioned that the SDGs are a framework for responsible business, just reinforcing that and understanding that the norms and values of the UN are relevant to business practice. In a recent study that we conducted, looking at the UN Global Compact companies, so companies that have made the commitment to the Global Compact, wanted to get a sense around the world of what SDGs they were aligning to most. And it's really interesting to see where there's the most interest from companies. Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, sees really a majority of companies engaging with. And it makes sense when you understand that most companies have supply chains, and understanding the workers' rights issues really at the core of that work. But gender equality is also very well, has very good engagement, good health and well-being, industry, innovation, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. It's very interesting to see what the world is engaging with and what the private sector is identifying as a priority. The UN Global Compact provides a proven approach to addressing sustainability leadership and the SDGs. As Anne Tracy from Colgate mentioned, it really is about building trust and transparency in your business, both internally to your internal stakeholders and letting them know that you've made that commitment to the norms and values of the UN and have incorporated a principles-based approach in your business, but also to your external stakeholders, including your investors and other stakeholders. To achieve your sustainability objectives, we provide guidance, training, tools, and support to member companies, many of which are public and not exclusive to Global Compact member companies, and I'll walk through those. And then at the core of what we do is helping to shape the corporate sustainability agenda under the umbrella of the United Nations. So we put together cross-functional working groups with governments, leading companies, and non-business stakeholders to really create the standards for best practice on a number of issues, which I will walk through here. So our action platforms are those cross-functional working groups. This is how we produce our material on best practice on what business leadership on the SDGs looks like, what low carbon and resilient development looks like, financial innovation for the SDGs, so on and so forth. This is how we produce our work. And you could find all of that guidance and material at our library, which is not behind a paywall. It's all public, so you could find the link here. Here you could find our guidance on what corporate leadership on the SDGs looks like. I would recommend the SDG Compass as a great starting point, and the Practical Guide to the SDGs as a great resource, encyclopedia to support your alignment with the SDGs. But of course, there's an incredible amount of resources there. And of course, tools. The Global Compact really does try and create standards for the world and puts them out for the world. So you may have heard of the Science-Based Targets Initiative to align the business community with the 2 degrees Celsius requirement that we not go above to stave off catastrophic climate change. Science-Based Targets is an initiative to calculate what your corporate responsibility is to be in line with that 2-degree solution. And we have tools available in public to achieve that. A more recent tool, which we're quite proud of, is the Gender Gap Analysis tool, which is to benchmark your company's performance against the ambition of the SDGs with gender equality. So how far your company is from achieving gender equality within your organization. And so these are public tools available, and we encourage you to take them. And of course, Thunderbird. The UN Global Compact has global initiatives and is doing incredible work at the US network level. Our job is to take what's happening at the global level and apply it to the US market, which is one of the most dynamic and productive markets in the world. We're very excited at the US network to partner with Thunderbird because, as I've been saying a lot now, Thunderbird is equally likely to graduate a CEO as a diplomat. And that really does speak to the expertise we're looking for at the US network to bring the leadership of the UN Global Compact and the UN to the US business community. We're just at the beginning of our journey and outlining how Thunderbird will really help us achieve our ambition. But already just a few months into this, it's really paying incredible dividends. We're super excited. And 2 projects that are now already public that I'd like to share with you are first the SDG Pioneer Recognition. This is a global awards recognition to recognize individuals who are really changing the conversation on business leadership on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This is a global initiative, and those global SDG pioneers are recognized during the UN General Assembly with a lunch with UN leadership and are promoted around the world as essentially mascots for corporate leadership. And it is an important initiative for the Global Compact. This is going to be the first year that the US is participating in a local round for that SDG Pioneer recognition, and Thunderbird is leading the charge to allow us to do that. So that SDG Pioneer recognition is live right now. If you go to globalcompactusa.org, if you are with a UN Global Compact member company, you can nominate a young professional at your company, 35 and younger, who is leading work on the Sustainable Development Goals to become the US SDG Pioneer, which will then be nominated to the Global Awards as the US contribution to that. So very excited there and would love to see some nominations from the Thunderbird Alumni Network. And perhaps even more exciting is our Young SDG Innovators Accelerator Program. Again, a global program. This time this is new. At the UN level, really coming from the Secretary General's office, there is a huge interest in developing the next generation of leadership, knowing that these problems young professionals are going to have to live with longer and are more motivated to solve, and really empowering that next generation. So the SDG Pioneers, as I mentioned, is recognizing young professionals below the age of 35. And then this Innovators Accelerator is designed to select, member companies are able to nominate a few young professionals from their companies for a free of charge accelerator program managed by Thunderbird over the course of 10 months to really incubate innovative and proprietary solutions to the world's problems. This is a unique accelerator. It will be run at the US level, but will have a global component. A dozen local networks around the world, from South Africa, the UK, Lebanon, Ukraine, and many other local networks are participating in this accelerator. And so there'll be local sessions both in Phoenix and in New York during the UN General Assembly, but there will also be global sessions when all local networks will come together on the side of the Web Summit in Lisbon in November. So if you are with a UN Global Compact member company and want to send a delegation to that Innovators program, we greatly welcome that that participation, and you could find that that nomination form on the UN Global Compact's website, unglobalcompact.org. And of course, we have many events at the UN Global Compact. Many are open to non-members, but of course some are specific to membership. On the screen, you'll actually see an image from our UN Global Compact Leaders Summit on the floor of the UN General Assembly a couple years ago. That's our current Executive Director and CEO, Lisa Kingo, on the main stage. The UN Global Compact holds global events on the side of major UN activities. And then, of course, the US network has events around the world. I haven't put it on the slides, but the US network will be holding an event in Chicago on May 9th with Thunderbird support. We'll be at Baker McKenzie's headquarters on the topic of General Counsel and Sustainability. It is open to all UN Global Compact members, but of course we are saving room for any Thunderbird alums that would like to attend, and please reach out to Thunderbird for participation in that. So at the global level, just want to highlight the UN calendar and how the Global Compact fits into that. Around the world, we hold Making Global Goals local business events managed by local networks around the world. No matter where you are in the world, I could assure you there's a UN Global Compact local network leading the conversation where you are. You could find access to those local networks on our website, but do please feel free to reach out to Thunderbird to help you navigate that process. And there are many events around the world under the moniker of Making Global Goals Local Business. The High Level Political Forum in July is a UN-wide series of events to discuss the progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And the UN Global Compact helps companies and businesses navigate their contribution to those events. During the UN General Assembly, we're going to hold our SDG Business Forum on the floor of the UN General Assembly to really highlight the leadership that businesses are playing to achieve the SDGs. At that same time this year, the Secretary General will be holding his climate summit to assess, he'll be leading that in New York on the side of the General Assembly, to assess how the world is helping to meet the ambition of the Paris Agreement. And we'll be making sure that Global Compact companies are well highlighted and their achievements are well highlighted at that event, because we cannot achieve a 2-degree world without business leadership. And then, of course, in the fall in Geneva is the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights, at which business plays a leading role. With that, I just would like to highlight one of the early initiatives that we're doing with Thunderbird as well. There is a Thunderbird student consulting survey. One of the classes here at Thunderbird is doing a survey of Thunderbird alum of their engagement with the UN Global Compact. Are they with the UN Global Compact company? Is it something they've considered? Is there a reason they're not and haven't made a commitment to the United Nations? Really good to understand that broad and global network of Thunderbird and to take those learnings into the work we do. So here is a link on the screen, and I believe it will be shared with you in other formats as well. And with that, I'd like to open this up to questions and conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Adam. That's such a great overview. And just before we open it up, Kelly, anything you want to add from our perspective at Thunderbird for Good and Thunderbird on this partnership with Adam and the USA Network?
Well, I think just that we're extremely excited, first of all, and I think that we're the more we speak with Adam, the more we talk with other representatives of the local network, the clearer it becomes is that it's a match made in heaven. I mean, it's really it fits with our DNA perfectly. And literally on a daily basis, something comes up where either Adam or I says, well, yeah, and we do that too, and we do that too. And every meeting that we go to, more potential and possibility comes up. And as Adam spoke about this survey that we're doing with Professor Mary Sally DeLuca's class, and it's kind of a first step for us to try to wrap our arms around what kind of work are our alumni doing around SDGs. We fully expect there's going to be even more synergies that are going to come up with what our alumni are doing, that we can use this relationship as an opportunity to really accentuate what our alumni are doing and also bring more opportunities to our faculty with research, our students with projects, and really the entire community. So I think we're just really at the beginning of the process, and we're discovering more and more every day.
Okay, it's great. So we'll open it up. I think really one of the first asks is, in your companies and companies that you are working with, if they're not members of the compact, really becoming ambassadors with us to get them engaged, whether by attending one of the events at first or actually becoming a member over time. So let's open it up to see if any questions or comments from our alums and friends around the world.
As we wait for questions, I'd just like to note that this is fresh off the presses. This was over a years-long RFP process where we spoke with many of the country's leading academic institutions, and we just announced this in February. And to say we knew what we were getting into in February would be an overstatement. So we're still figuring this out. And so the interests and questions of the alumni network, I believe, will really help guide the development of this partnership, which we are so invested in.
Don't be bashful, alums.
I think we're also really excited about the opportunities that this is going to pose for students. So we've got several students that are already on board to be working with us this summer, so I think there's going to be some opportunities there.
All right, so I'll get to it. So Anna Shen, thanks Anna for all your work in helping this possible. She asks, what are the most important priorities of the USA Network at this moment, Adam?
So I'll take that as a two-pronged question, both what are our organizational priorities and what are our engagement priorities to help companies with. And I'll start with the latter. So for the Global Compact as a whole, obviously the SDGs and SDG alignment is critical, and there are many other initiatives of which I touched on some of them in the slides. There are many priorities across the globe. At the U.S. network level, we see a few priorities. When you think of sustainable development, you don't often think of the U.S., but I think that's a mistake because we still have a lot of work to do here in the U.S. on some very basic issues, and we have many of the world's leading companies to help achieve that. So first and foremost is SDG alignment and helping US companies better align with the SDGs. Two is gender equality, unfortunately an area that the US really does need to improve upon and where the UN Global Compact can provide great leadership. Third is climate action, an area in which the US really does have a leadership role and needs to establish it more firmly, and businesses are very much doing that. And lastly is the role of general counsel and empowering legal to take more of an accelerator role in the achievement of sustainability priorities. We see in the US that the legal department and general counsel plays a much more engaged role in perhaps decelerating sustainable achievements. And so we want to help bring them into onto the team, as it were. For the organizational priorities of the network, the US network of the UN Global Compact, and so what that means is companies in the Global Compact who are based in the US. By virtue of being a US company, you are in the US network. We have fewer members in the US than Argentina, than in France, than in Spain. And there are many reasons for this. The complicated relationship with the UN in this country is surely part of it. But additionally, the US network is relatively new and there hasn't been a priority of engaging US companies. And so we are now full force trying to better engage US companies, have those conversations, and bring them into the community of nations and the global community of companies leading this work. So that is a very big priority for us. And then in partnership with Thunderbird to deeply and profoundly increase the ability to support US companies to achieve these ambitions. So really stepping up our programming. So I think those are our organizational priorities at this time.
So Deborah is asking, for those who don't belong to a UN Compact company, what's the process of engaging and perhaps becoming a member? Yeah.
Thank you for asking that question. A commitment to the Global Compact as three components. And at its core is really that commitment. With all of our programming and everything we do, Really, at its core, the UN Global Compact is a vehicle for a meaningful commitment to the world and to your company that you're going to run a principles-based business. And so it starts with a CEO level commitment to the Secretary General. That is a letter from your CEO or executive director, if you're not at a business, to the Secretary General. We have a standard format on our website, but you can take any which way you want. And it's a commitment to the 10 principles and the ambition of the SDGs, submitted along with a basic application on our website. If your company, getting to the CEO is always a different route depending on the company, and we're here to support you to make that case internally should you wish to do so. The second component of the commitment is the communication of progress. It's not enough just to make that commitment. You need to show the UN that you are upholding that commitment, and so on an annual basis, we ask companies to communicate to the United Nations what they're doing to uphold that commitment. For a large company that already has a sustainability report, it's submitting that sustainability report to us for us to share with the United Nations during the HLPF on what companies are doing to uphold the principles. But for smaller companies, it may be a letter from your CEO on an annual basis talking about what you're doing. The third component, and it's hard to avoid this, is there is a financial component. It is quite small because we do ask the business community, the private sector, to fund the UN's work. If you're a company below 50 million in revenue, it is a voluntary commitment. We do, and the UN as a whole believes that small business is critical to the achievement of the world we want and the Sustainable Development Goals. And so the UN Global Compact is of no charge to companies below 50 million in revenue. Above that, it's based on revenue, but I could tell you for the world's largest companies, with the highest level of engagement, it tops out at 20,000 US per year. So it's pretty minor, and it only goes down from there. I just want to highlight one other thing. We do have just a couple of exclusionary criteria that there are a few companies we can't allow in the compact. This is at its core an inclusionary initiative. We want the world's businesses to be a part of it, but we are unable to accept controversial weapons companies. So as part of the UN, no cluster munition manufacturers or those who support that. Tobacco, the UN Global Compact, in line with the World Health Organization, has decided not to accept tobacco companies into the UN Global Compact. And then the third, which is the odd man out, is no companies below 10 employees. And that's because for those micro enterprises, it's very hard to do the integrity screen to let them in. However, we at the US Local Network have the ability to grant exemption to that 10 employee rule. And with our trusted partners, Thunderbird, we have the ability to do that for any graduates that are interested in doing so and are part of a micro enterprise.
Super. So just building on this, Julie's asking, saying, thanks for the presentation. Do companies have to select a minimum amount of the SDGs? How are they held accountable for meeting the goals? You mentioned the accountability piece, but how about a minimum? Is there a minimum threshold of the SDGs that they have to select, make commitments to?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it gets to the core of what we do and the kind of the story we want to tell for business. And I'll start with the principles. The principles are the foundation on which to build a decent and responsible business. I think you cannot compromise on human rights. You cannot compromise on a commitment to the environment, on labor, on anti-corruption. A good business is built on those principles. However, the Sustainable Development Goals are a political tool. They were created by nation states for nation states. The private sector had a role as a stakeholder, but they were not written for businesses. And that is why the UN Global Compact was tasked with defining what business leadership looks like in regard to the SDGs. In the commitment to the Global Compact now, it's a commitment to the ambition of the SDGs, but not any particular SDG. We can't expect the world's businesses to solve every problem. They may not be material to your business. What we ask in our guidance, we suggest is that you do a materiality analysis of the SDGs where you can have the most positive impact, and frankly, where you're having a negative impact, and to address those. But we can't expect every business to solve all the world's problems, and we don't.
So both Jamar and Deborah are asking for follow-up information. We will share the slides, and maybe what we could do is add on the slides the contact information for Kelly and Derek, who are our point people here at Thunderbird for Good and Thunderbird in terms of follow-up. And then Zahir is asking, if we're just starting a play that could have significant social and economic impact, what's the appropriate way to engage? If you perhaps if you're pre-membership,
Yep.
there's something you can do to just start getting into the game, so to speak.
Yeah, it depends on where your company is on that maturity scale. If you're literally just getting started in sustainability, you don't have a sustainability team at your office, or a diversity and inclusion, or haven't identified what your organizational priorities are or impacts are. Well, I would start with the SDG compass, frankly, and to look at how to measure your company against the SDGs and use that as the foundation for next steps. It's really about understanding where your impacts and opportunities are, and it all goes from there. If your company can have the most impact on gender equality, but either positive or negative, then you organize your business around addressing that. If it's another SDG, then you do it there. But you have to understand kind of where your impacts are. I think it also is relevant whether you're with a private or a public company. If you're with a public company, really looking at what investors are looking at and how to report that to them. Whether that's a standalone sustainability report, obviously you need something to report on. You need to have initiatives that you're prioritizing, and understanding what you're doing. The SDGs provide a good compass for that. If you're a private company, the picture changes a bit, and it's understanding who your stakeholders are, what their interests are, and organizing around that. If this is about competitiveness in the marketplace and to the end customer, if you're a B2C business, there are a lot of stories to tell there. If you sell to retailers like Walmart or Target, how to make this more competitive in that sale. For B2B, how your carbon footprint may reduce the Scope 3 carbon footprint of your customers. It is a very large and complex process, and I did reference that, and I recognize that. And that's why it's really important to do that materiality analysis at the start to understand where to focus your time.
And just to refresh, is that you put a link to the library.
Correct.
And that's open to, you don't have to be a member.
Correct.
So the link was?
It's www.unglobalcompact.org/library.
And that's where you would find that compass.
Correct, and it's quite a robust library. We are quite a prolific author of material, so I would just go there and search for SDG Compass.
Yeah, and you could probably just, you could just search SDG Compass and it comes right up. So I think
true.
that's really the way, Zahir and others who, if you're just starting in this path and you have a significant play on the social, economic, environmental side, it might be a way just to frame what you're already doing and also see other opportunities, gaps that might exist.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, perhaps a way to start is a commitment to the Global Compact to get alignment in your organization, because that CEO level commitment does communicate externally and internally the ambition if you haven't yet started. Sometimes a commitment is a great place to start.
And then Anna has a follow-up. How does it actually work in practice, and what are some of the most difficult, barriers to actually seeing implementation at the company level once they have signed on?
How much time do we have? So the barriers to action, I think specifically with regard to the SDGs we're talking about, it's really about how much buy-in you're getting from the C-suite, because a lot of this does require a transformational understanding of your own business and understanding the role you play in the world. Of course, it's about profitability. Of course, it's about shareholder value. But changing the mindset to understand that being responsible and principle-based is an investment in that long-term shareholder value. And frankly, in the quarterly returns, as investors are making investments more and more along these lines. And it really is a sea change in that understanding. And to say that isn't a challenge would be a disservice to what we're doing, particularly in the United States. Looking around the world, and I think because you see so much engagement with the UN Global Compact around the world, particularly with my colleagues in Europe, it is enough simply to say this is the right thing to do, and business will move based on that. Not to say that the U.S. has any ethical lapses, but I think the conversation in the U.S. is, okay, I get it's the right thing to do, but why is it good for my business? What is the business case? And that's not the wrong question to ask. It's just a different question we get from elsewhere in the world. And so building that case is not impossible. In fact, it's very possible. It just requires some additional legwork.
And I think this is some place where I think we see the opportunity for Thunderbird to help and to provide tools and training. This first program, the SDG Innovators, will actually help a subset of organizations through real concrete projects that are getting approval and support from the C-suite that are going to be actionable for business outcomes.
Yeah.
And so I think we do have a lot to offer in terms of how we can help U.S. businesses understand what is the business case for this work beyond just it's the right thing to do.
Well, and to that, so the SDGs provide a framework to understanding the work you're already doing. And that's incredibly important because it's a set of KPIs for the world that no matter where you are in the world, whether you're a business, you're a government, you're a nonprofit, whether you're an individual, these are KPIs that we all share. So it creates for a way to communicate the work that we're all doing. But what's really important to achieve them is that we create new business opportunities and breakthrough innovation to achieve them. And frankly, business has to be the ones to do that because that's where innovation occurs. And so the SDG Innovation Accelerator Program we see as the contribution from us to make that happen. This will be the pilot year, but we're really excited about where it can go, and we hope to bring on many companies to create solutions to the world's challenges and to make money doing so.
And Adam, you mentioned in one of the priorities general counsels. I think maybe you could just develop that more as one of the challenges, and the reason being, as we understand it, is the relatively litigious environment of the United States, and therefore companies, not surprisingly, are worried about getting out in front and making commitments that then they could be taken to court about.
Of course.
Right? So that's really part of why the focus on general counsels, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I think the U.S. and lawyers are unique in the world in many ways, and that's good and bad and everything in between. When it comes to these really transformational changes for business and how we think about ourselves and really even just putting out publicly that you have a pay gap between genders at your organization opens you up to litigation, but you can't solve problems unless you identify them. And so how do you bridge that divide between doing what you have to do to make those changes, but not putting yourself in a position that risks business? And it is a tricky line to navigate, and so we're with general counsel on that journey. The organizations that we see that are the most engaged and are frankly the most productive in achieving a lot of these aims are those that have the buy-in not only from the CEO but from the general counsel and frankly the board. At our event on May 9th, we'll be with speakers, the Chief Legal Counsel of Clorox Company, of Nestle, and several others talking about how they bridge that internally. And it really it requires individual leadership to do that.
And just given our audience of having, alumni around the world, what's happening in places like China and other countries around the Compact and SDGs and the 10 principles? Where do you see really interesting things happening or potential risks and challenges in terms of the agenda?
It's a great question, and one that is always a little embarrassing because it highlights how little the U.S. is actually doing. Yeah. China's a great example. So our executive director and CEO, Lisa Kingo, was just at the, I'm gonna bungle this, the One Road Initiative.
One Belt,
One Road, thank you. At a private retreat with the CEOs of all the leaders of Chinese companies, talking about how to integrate this into Chinese business. And so they now have a mandate from somewhere in the Chinese government that, hey, companies are doing this. And so we see in China, actually, many of the Chinese organizations from US companies engaged in the compact, but not the parent US company. And so where there is political leadership pushing companies to do things, you see a lot more movement. And for better or worse, we don't have that in the US. when it comes to China, obviously we put a big focus on human rights and anti-corruption. When it comes to the developing world, we have a new local network in the DRC in Congo we're quite proud of. They're already a force in that country focused on anti-corruption and human rights in the mining industry. And very excitingly are providing that cover for businesses to talk about anti-corruption in a way that's under the cover of the United Nations. It gives the ability to have these great conversations. Yeah, we have many local networks. It's incredibly exciting. What is worth noting is that for the most part around the world, when you think corporate sustainability, corporate responsibility, it's synonymous with the UN Global Compact. We're not there yet in the US, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So Naveen mentions that he didn't get the notification. We apologize, Naveen. We're still getting, our messaging and alumni communications. That's why we have an alumni communications team as part of the new Thunderbird Global Alumni Network. I think we've taped this, right, Robin? And so a link will be made available to all of you as well as the slides. And I'm sure we're going to do more on this topic as we move forward. I guess, unless there's any other questions from our alums, I'll ask one last one and we'll end. And that is what we found, as you know, we have a big project with LA on the SDGs and implementation at the city level.
Yeah.
That's really an interesting place, particularly when you maybe don't have as a supportive national government around the compact and UN work and the SDGs. So what's the goal, what's the approach for our USA network and more generally around companies and cities and the SDGs?
So it's something at the US level we're very interested in exploring. We have a sister program at the global level called UN Global Compact Cities that does work with cities around the world. And we haven't really explored that at the US level yet. It's something we hope to do. But there is interest from a number of cities around the world. I'll be going actually to Puerto Rico next week to give a talk about the rebuilding of Puerto Rico and the role the SDGs can play, being flown in by the government, of the local government to do so. There's a lot of opportunity there, definitely worth exploring. And what we're seeing is, in the same way when the US declared their intention to pull out of the Paris Agreement, companies said we're still in. And you know what, local governments have as well. When you're seeing in the UK, DFID, if you want to make get a contract with DFID, you have to be an organization that's made a commitment to the UN Global Compact.
Just for all Department for International Development, sort of the USAID equivalent in the UK?
Now, I don't think we'll see that in the US, but perhaps at the state level, I know that in California, in order to do business, you have to disclose your climate emissions, your carbon emissions through CDP. And there are opportunities with the UN Global Compact to explore as we expand our presence here.
Super. Anything else you want to add at this point, Kelly, with our group around the world here?
Just that if there's any interest or ideas, I mean, our alumni are always such a great resource for us to help us as we shape up this relationships. We're all ears. So I think we're going to, as part of the follow-up, be able to share some contact information. So if anybody has any thoughts, any ideas, send them our way. We'd love to hear them.
I want to thank everybody, Dawn, Olivia, Robin, especially Kelly and our team here, and Adam for doing this. We're going to keep moving this forward. Is there one more? Did I just see there's an interest or ideas? Have many. I would love to talk to someone. Naveen, please. Great, Naveen. Great to have you. Kelly's going to follow up with the team directly with you, okay, Naveen? But reach out to her, Kelly Kreiser. And you can easily find why don't we put her email? Why don't you plug it in, Rob? We're going to put Kelly's email right into the chat here. Okay, so thanks everyone. The next one will be the last Wednesday of May, and we are still trying to confirm our speaker. We're hoping that it's going to be another. We know it's going to be another fantastic one, but we have a particular person in mind, and we'll let you know as soon as possible. So you now have Kelly's email for follow-up, and then we'll share the slide deck and the link to this webinar. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you may be.